Welcome back to Post Sports Live. I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe, and we are back from our Olympics break with LaVar Arrington and Dan Steinberg. We're a short show today because of some sickness issues with the family.
I was waiting for them to show my smile. They took
nice
so
close-up
long.
on LaVar smiling.
I tried to smile as big as
Moment.
possible.
Flash
but
the pearly
they
whites,
took a
man.
very long time to pan out. They like staying on Jonathan out of the break. So
Well, you guys know who everybody who watches the shows for
that's
this guy.
correct.
Sure.
All right, obviously. All right, so lots to talk about in this show. We're going to lead off with the Wizards and the latest argument for a curse of the Wizards with Nene's injury. We'll talk about the Redskins
Is
and
that
the
a
Orakpo. Hey, it could be. The curse of Le Boulet is well known. The Redskins and whether or not they should re-sign Brian Orakpo. Get your guys' thoughts on that. Whether or not they have a choice. The NFL's considering penalizing folks for using the N-word on the field.
What is the N-word?
Get your feelings on that, LaVar.
What does N mean?
This is a family show, so we're gonna keep it at that. We'll talk about the Capitals and the potential hangover for Ovechkin coming back from Olympic disappointment again, and then of course the additional stress of having his father's heart surgery, and then we'll talk about the Nationals and some of the biggest obstacles as they're back on the field down in Vieira spring training. We're going to try to have Adam Kilgore on the show next week to sort of do a full preview. Boz will join us via video on the show later. But I want to start out with the Wizards and Mr. Steinberg with you. Nene's injury, 6 weeks, sprained MCL. Can the Wizards still make the playoffs? They're currently in the 5th seed.
I think absolutely. I was actually looking at the schedule this morning. The way their schedule breaks down, they have a bunch of games left against really good teams, but they also have a whole bunch of games against really bad teams, and they don't play a lot of the teams in the middle. They have 12 of their 26 games that they have left are against teams with a winning percentage of under 400. That's bad. I mean, we're not talking about mediocre. We're talking about bad. And I think that the Wizards without Nene are not bad. They're just kind of obviously not as good. They're not a threat to do anything in the playoffs without him. But I think that they're still better than the Philadelphias and the Orlandos of the world. And I think if they can take care of business against those bad teams, they don't even have to worry about beating the good teams. If they, obviously this is kind of readjusting the goals a little bit, but if they go something like 500 down the stretch and finish 500 for the year, they're definitely in the playoffs. And then if they get him back, then we can start having that conversation again. So I think absolutely they should still make the playoffs.
Now, you said they're not that bad without him. They've lost 6 of 7 this year without him, and their current record without him in the lineup since he's been a Wizard is 8-34. How can you say that?
I mean, I think some of that circumstance is a pretty small sample size that you're looking at for this season.
Sure.
Last season, I'm not really worried about because a lot of those games were without John Wall last year.
Right.
So the way that John Wall is playing, John Wall is obviously the key, the most important player. They don't need a ton from some of these guys that are going to be replacing him. Certainly, offensively, they don't need a ton. I think they need one of these other big guys, maybe Booker or Gortat, to sort of try to replace what Nene does defensively. And I don't know if that's really possible. But again, I think that a team with Wall and some of the other parts that they have is just better than some of these flailing, horrible East teams that they play down the stretch.
They're 14-14 at home, 14-14 on the road, 5-5 in their last 10. LaVar, if that's not a 500 team, the definition of a 500 team, I don't know what is. Do you agree with Dan? Do you think that they can make the playoffs and stay around that 500 level without Nene?
I think they can make the playoffs for all those reasons that Dan just gave, as a matter of fact, due to the strength of schedule. They have shown that historically during this season as well, that they don't play very well against poor teams at times as well. So I think that you can't undervalue what Nene brings to the table. I think we have to wait and see if this team can continue to play at a high level without his presence on the court. And I think that would be the most prudent way of approaching it, for the simple fact that you have to have that leadership. You have to have that presence that holds guys accountable and can kind of calm guys down and slow things down a little bit from a leader standpoint when games may seem to be getting out of hand or just needs to be reeled in just a little bit. We're going to find out if they have somebody else outside of Nene that can provide that presence, that leadership value. And if they have that, then you could assume that they may make a really, really strong run. If they don't, I wouldn't be surprised if they start losing games that they shouldn't lose.
Can I say too, obviously this is like forecasting way into the future, but a couple of things that would concern me about all of this. First of all, they say 6 weeks. I think the Wizards said 6 weeks in the press release, which gets you up to maybe 1 week before the playoffs. The Wizards, and a lot of teams, but the Wizards especially, have had this kind of history of guys not coming back exactly when they say they're going to. And if that happens here, once you push it into the first week of the playoff. I mean,
they're probably,
forget the Wizards. Nene has a history of not coming
Nene
back.
does
right?
too, but I mean, with Otto Porter thing,
Yep.
Gilbert Arenas thing, John Wall last year, all of these things have dragged on longer than we thought. It doesn't have to drag on for much longer than 6 weeks for that to kind of ruin what I was talking about. And I guess the other thing is, even if the Wizards do stay above 500 and get that playoff spot, it's in a really kind of bunched up situation right now with the 5, 6, the 4th seed, all these seeds. If you get down to 7 or 8, we sort of know that's not going to go well against Indiana or Miami.
So that's not going to go well.
And so I mean, if there's any way for them to keep their heads above that 6th seed, that would really be key.
We got to figure if they're in that range. The next question is going to be how close Nene is going to be to coming back. Do you bring him back before the playoffs? Do you risk that? Do you
and even if he
rest
comes
him
back,
until the playoffs? It all
presumably
depends.
he'd have
We'll
some
see.
kind of minutes limit.
You mentioned it earlier, but they only have 8 games remaining out of 26 against teams with winning records. So there is, the path is there for them to succeed with that, and we'll see how it goes.
But it's, I mean, not to toot our own horns. Anyone who watches the NBA or the Wizards would have said this, but we've been saying all year, it's kind of like a matter of time until something happens.
Yeah, we've seen this before. All right, guys, let's move on to the Redskins. And currently, the representatives for Brian Orakpo, LaVar, and the team are in negotiations about the contract. They're just considering whether or not to franchise him. They're talking. It seems like there could be some progress there, but nothing yet. Give me your thoughts on whether or not the team should re-sign Brian Orakpo.
Here's one piece of it. You franchise him because the person that would probably be his biggest supporter is basically on a franchise tag as well, which is Jim Haslett. So Jim Haslett, one year deal, right? So as an organization, I franchise tag him, and that fits because Jim Haslett, in his mind, knows he has to have Brian Orakpo if he's going to have a measured amount of success to keep him on this team as a coach. Now, on the other side of it, if you give him a big contract now and you say, you know what, you're one of our cornerstones, you're a key cog, and we believe you can stay healthy and make plays and play at a high level for this team, then you give them that deal now. That's more of a organizational decision if you make that call. Because if you do the franchise tag, now you let him get to unrestricted free agency, or you try to get a deal done as the season wears on. If I'm Brian Orakpo, I'm not sure exactly how he approaches it. If they give him a franchise tag, that says you don't trust me. That says that we want to keep you, but we don't want to pay you what you're worth. And so you have to prove to us that we should give you a bigger contract moving forward. He may want to just play the season out and test the market, because that could leave a bad taste in somebody's mouth knowing that there wasn't a commitment made to him in that way. So you can look at it from two different perspectives, but I think the most important part of this is the biggest proponent for Brian Orakpo to come back to this team is Jim Haslett, because he only has 1 year to prove that this defense can improve from what it has been over the last few seasons, or since he's been the defensive coordinator here.
So in your mind, he's coming back.
He's coming
They'll
back.
figure out a way, whether it's franchise. Yeah. Dan, what do you think?
I think all of that makes sense. I think he's probably right, especially with the franchise thing. I think my hesitation, the hesitation of a lot of Redskins fans, is when you're talking about the amount of money that he wants or deserves. There just don't seem to be many times in the season or in particular games where you feel like this guy has taken over a game by himself. Where he, and you do feel that way about some of the dominant defensive players in the NFL, where a guy can't be blocked and he's just taking over a game by himself. It hasn't really happened that many times, and his stats have been okay, his sacks numbers have been okay, but you just don't feel like he's a guy a lot of times that completely tilts the field. And I think that when you're talking about the amount of money, when you're talking about sort of starting over and probably having a rebuilding year, I think that's why a lot of fans are saying, look, this defense was not particularly good last year, and if he is one of the best players on it, maybe that doesn't speak very highly for him.
He's a very good pro. He has not proven to be a great pro.
I think that's
so the justification of it is, if you want great, and we had this debate about John Wall, and look, after John Wall got his deal, he started playing at a different level. So maybe it's just a matter of him getting a new deal and
pieces around.
Well,
but I also I think that when the Redskins defense under Haslett has had some of its best games at the end of that 2012 season, he wasn't there,
right.
And so obviously Rob Jackson is not the solution for a defensive problem.
He
exactly,
could but I still think that they're two different players. The Orakpo is a much more explosive player than what Rob Jackson is. Rob Jackson is a much more fundamentally and technique sound player than what Brian Orakpo is. The interesting thing about it is that you're talking about somebody who wants a very nice size deal in Brian Orakpo, but he's really not even separated himself from the guy that's behind him. They're different players, but that's not to say that Rob Jackson wouldn't be as effective as a starter as Brian Orakpo.
You've always been a big proponent of Jackson. He just definitely.
Well, he can play. The suspension.
Three-time Pro Bowler.
Hold on
39 and a half
I'm about
sacks,
to do it.
39 and a half sacks in his 5-year career. I'm just saying.
He was an alternate.
Alternate. All right. He played in the Pro Bowl.
He was an alternate.
Right, I'm just saying. He's
right.
a 5-year career, 39 and a half sacks.
Rookie
one
year.
of those years as a cat because he was injured.
Can I say one thing?
Last
Obviously,
point.
you're not drafting guys or you're not choosing your players based on distractions or whatever. But when you say that he's a pro, he has been a total solid guy for the entire time that he's been here. And the Redskins can't always say that about
Joe
their
Gibbs,
guys,
true Redskin. Right?
Yeah.
All right.
Oh, gosh.
Let's move on to the NFL's. Some news came out this week from the Fritz Pollard Alliance, the group that monitors racial diversity in the NFL, LaVar. And there's a motion on the table for the league to consider assessing a 15-yard penalty for referees to assess that anytime they hear the N-word on the field next year. Give me your thoughts on that, having played in the league and now covering it.
I think in theory it sounds good, but in the heat of the moment, unless you're able to see a guy say it, it's moving so quickly out there on that field. And if you're hearing people talking trash, who's to say you know exactly who's saying what and at what point in time? And for what it's worth, whether it's right or wrong, there's a lot of trash talk that goes on that field. And there's a lot of words that are used that if you're going to open the forum up to penalizing for one word, then you would have to assume that you now have to start doing a list of words that you're not able to say on the football field. I think what would be more impactful with a rule like that would be to apply it in the locker room, apply it in the workplace in general, as opposed to on the playing field. The playing field is a violent, turbulent place, and I think that there still should be a level of control. There should be a level of integrity and respect for your fellow athletes and teammates. But I think that when you're looking at the weight of that, you're saying you're trying to set a standard that the N-word shouldn't be used, and it shouldn't be used in the workplace. I think that you should apply that to the locker room and the weight room and different things like that, because that's basically saying, look, let's get these young men to start appreciating where they work. Let's get them and help them understand that when you leave football, you're able to get away with how you dress, how you speak sometimes, how you interact in this environment, because it's a unique environment. But you still should be approaching that environment as if it is a true workplace. And I think that by instilling or putting a rule like that in place, it may begin to create a standard that has not been there. The locker room, the field, you can say exactly what you want to say, how you want to say it, when you want to say it, and there are no repercussions to it. So I think by adding something like that, I think you started in the locker room and you set that standard there. I think that would be the most impactful way to implement a rule like that.
Sort of leave it to the teams to sort of police that, really.
Absolutely.
Dan, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I can't disagree with anything LaVar said. I think the first thing that he mentioned, to me, is the biggest thing. If there's a scrum of guys and you hear that word coming out or any other offensive word, how in the world can you know who? I mean, if there was like a running transcript of everything that everyone said, maybe then you can say, oh, this person said this, but to me, it seems like opening yourself up. And if you falsely penalize one team for a word that the other team said, I mean, there's enough officiating problems in the NFL as it is. So that would be my one problem. The other thing is the other thing that LaVar mentioned. There are a lot of offensive words out there that some people are trying to kind of clear from the language. And I think whatever you think about that goal, I don't know how you could just pick one if you're going to go this way. We've seen guys get fined large amounts of money for using homophobic slurs. And with all the attention that those issues are getting right now, it seems weird that you would do this and not sort of introduce those other words at the same time. But then you've got like a whole list of, and I mean, I don't.
Pandora's box is what it really is.
Yeah, Obviously, none of us would be able to use words like that in our workplace in any kind of professional way without getting shown the door. But it's kind of a different situation.
Could you imagine walking out after the show's over? All right, my N-words. I holler at y'all N-words later.
Can we get someone with a handheld camera?
But that's really the reality of what goes on at these locker rooms.
And not just that either. We hear stories of, players spitting in each other's faces without getting penalized, players grabbing each other's private parts and squeezing, all kinds of.
That's a major part of the game.
And those things, whether they're against the law or not, or the rules or not, it's not possible to police something like that. I think you have to just sort of.
As a secondary let's assume this thing is adopted. I would think of it, remember the controversy last year with the rule change with the ball carrier lowering his head? And you just barely saw any flags, right? Yeah. I would wonder if it would be one of those that there's a lot of talk about on the front end, and rightly so, but then you rarely see a flag because it'd be very difficult to your guys' point.
I think it's a bigger headache unless you implement it in a place where you clearly can govern and monitor it. I think that you're running into a tremendous legal situation, a tremendous liability issue. As Dan mentioned, you penalize a guy that allegedly used that word. First of all, it's your word versus his word in that moment. That's first and foremost. Mm-hmm. But secondly,
there's mics everywhere.
If you have, but how do you place them? How do you place? There's mics everywhere, okay, but there's cameras everywhere. But how do you place those words?
Right. Yeah, so that would be an argument for fining guys after the fact. If you hear it and you can see who's saying it, but that's a lot different than an official calling it live. Right.
That's still very difficult to be able to identify who's saying what when you hear it on those mega boom mics.
What would be more detrimental to a player, a flag or a hit in his pocketbook? What would be?
I certainly believe that if you hit somebody in their pocketbook, that's going to hit closer to home because that's personalized. Whereas you got to hope and pray that player in particular is a team player and values the fact that if I get a penalty, I'm hurting my team by getting this penalty. But you go in their pocketbook, that's certainly going to make more of an impact on somebody.
Pocketbook is such an outdated term. Why did I use that? Anyway, you guys knew what I was talking about. All right, let's move on, guys, to the Caps. And the Winter Olympics are over. The break, the NHL is getting back to action tonight. The Caps actually play Thursday. Actually, a tough stretch to open up the last stretch for the Caps, 4 of 5 games on the road. And I want to talk to you, Dan, about Alex Ovechkin and the Caps specifically. Obviously, we know about the Caps' difficult stretch ahead, but what do you expect from him? And what is the sort of – I want to read a quote from Adam Oates to sort of set this up. The toughest thing is obviously going to be Ovi and where his head is. Which I think we can all say we don't blame him. I'm sorry, I totally misread that. Which is obviously going to be Ovi and where his head is, which I think we can all say we don't blame him. Coach Adam Oates said, "I'll try to get him back on page as fast as I can. He might be down for a bit. Maybe he can shake it off. Who knows?" Not really optimistic from the head coach's standpoint, Dan.
It's not, and there's been so much chatter for years and years about Sochi and Ovechkin and winning gold on his home ice. It went about as poorly as it possibly could have for him. He scored 1 goal within the first minute, game, I think, of competition. And then he didn't score. His team didn't score. I think they got eliminated, as soon as was reasonably, as soon as possible, really. They weren't going to lose before the quarterfinals. And so it went terribly. I think that I mentioned before the Olympics started, I thought there could be a disaster if he fared poorly there and came back and didn't have the motivation.
And the coach talked bad about him too.
The Russian coach, exactly. The Russian coach specifically mentioned him. I don't know. The thing is with the Capitals right now, Ovechkin's played so great in the first half of the season, and they're still not in playoff position. So really, for them to make a run here, it's going to take far more than just Ovechkin. If he's not scoring at a high pace, they're in all kinds of trouble anyhow. But I guess now that I sit here and think about it, I can't imagine that he's going to come back and dog it after all the frustration, all the criticism there. So really, when it comes down to it, I think he's probably not the thing that we have to worry about with the Caps moving forward. But obviously, he is what we will worry about because that's what we do. But think about
who's number 1 in the Metro Division.
The Penguins.
Add a little salt to the wound. Add a little insult to injury. Number 1 in the Metro Division.
Another gold for Crosby.
Oh, my gosh. And another goal for, this has been the 2 guys that have been connected to one another from day one. Who's better? Is it the grade 8? Is it the kid? Is it Crosby, the kid? The golden boy. It may be hard. They play different. Really. They play, there you go. They play different positions and this, that, and the other. But when you look at it, it just seems like whenever there's a big stage or something has to be delivered, that guy didn't score a goal the entire games. They make it into the gold medal game.
He scored the most important goal of that game. Yeah,
he
you're right.
scores the goal.
You're right.
That is the go-ahead goal for them to win the gold medal. It just seems as though he can't escape Crosby either.
Right.
And I'm sure that's something that's weighing on him as well, as you're trying to establish that you may be the greatest hockey player in the National Hockey League.
In the world. Yeah.
And in the world. And it just keeps coming up that a guy that can't even stay healthy.
Your rival wins gold.
He can't even stay healthy. I mean, how much
country.
does Crosby really play? But when it matters, the dude finds a way to make a difference, and I think that's an insult to injury there, too.
You know, it's true. We didn't even mention the fact that his father, obviously we hope he's okay. His father had some heart troubles after the.
Yeah, sure.
And Ovechkin, we know how close he is. His father's at the practice rink all the time. His father's at virtually every home game. So there's that, too. And then, we talk about Nick Backstrom, who's obviously the second most important player. And
what a heartbreaker.
Total heartbreaker. Doesn't get to participate. It's still not even clear whether he's going to ever get that silver medal for being part of the team.
Recover. Right.
I mean, and he's obviously the second most important player on the Capitals.
And he's clearly dejected by what took place.
Clearly dejected. Yeah, he looked miserable. And, Carlson doesn't get any medal.
Carlson played well.
He played well.
He played well, but he doesn't get a medal.
Right. He played well.
Erat doesn't get a medal. And Marcus Johansson, the fifth guy, is currently in Sweden with some kind of visa problems and didn't make it back for practice today.
So all in all,
you talk about five guys. Yeah, each of them had
the Caps.
A pretty rough go of it over there.
Let me ask you this quickly in the last 30 seconds we have. Could the difficult schedule be a good thing for the Caps in any way?
I do think it could be. Because we've seen that this team has for years played its best when its backs are against the wall, and they're right up against the wall right now. And they do sometimes come out a little bit tentative against weaker teams. So I think it could help them.
I'd agree. Yes. I'd agree.
If they're able to run this gauntlet at the end of this season here, you would think that they'd be more battle tested and ready for the playoffs. That if
it certainly would be a
crowded field right now.
I think we thought that last year too.
Let me tell you something. That would be a super pop of the balloon if they miss the playoffs this year. I mean, that's one of those whoopee cushion sound balloon deals if they don't make it.
Plenty of time. Like, as I mentioned, 4 of the next 5 on the road. So we'll see how they come out of the break and how all the players who played in Sochi respond. Let's move on to the Nationals, guys. And we caught up with Thomas Boswell down in Vieira just a couple days ago to get his thoughts on the spring. And
he looked really warm.
He looks warm. It's really nice
happy.
down there. It's about 80 degrees. Let's hear from Bos, and then we'll come on the other side.
The Nats had a chance to see where they failed under the pressure of expectations, what parts of their team needed tightening up, and they've actually improved almost all those areas. They added a starting pitcher they needed, Doug Fister. That was probably a real steal. Now they actually seem like an older and more mature team. A lot of them seem to have filled out 10, 15, 20 pounds. The biggest change in tone for the Nationals this year will be their new manager, Matt Williams. This should be a much more orderly, crisply functioning baseball team under Williams. If it isn't, there could be some tension, but I think it'll work out the way they hope it will.
All right, so there's Boz sort of talking about the storylines for the season.
I'm amazed that Boz thinks something will work out well for the Nats. It's unusual.
Hey, he looked comfortable down there in the stands, his hair blowing in the wind. I want to ask you guys each, what do you feel are the biggest obstacles for the Nationals going into this season?
I'm going to choose the Braves. I think the Braves, obviously last year, were far better, I think, than we imagined. And also, they just owned the Nats head-to-head. I think they were 13-6, something like that, against the Nats. If you reverse that entirely, if the Nats somehow had gone 13-6 against the Braves, I think they would have won a division. There was several really heartbreaking losses. There was that sweep at home against the Braves that really just seemed to kind of crush the season in the middle of the summer. And the Braves, they're locking up all of their young talent. We talk about how talented the Nationals are, and certainly they are, but I think that a lot of that is because we're here in Washington. The Braves have a great team, and like I said, they were so dominant against the Nationals head-to-head that the Nationals have to solve that problem. They have to solve that problem. They have to beat the Braves head-to-head, and they have to, before they worry about anything else, because the wild card is just such a crapshoot nowadays.
Right.
You need a division title for that to really matter, and I think the Braves are the number one obstacle.
Braves number one obstacle. LaVar, what are your thoughts?
I think accountability and management of expectations are the biggest obstacles for this team. I think it's more so about them. If they can place a healthy amount of accountability on each and every last one of themselves, as to how they approach this season and how they approach these games. I think that they will have a positive response to new management, and they will have a positive, in my opinion, they will have positive experiences on the playing field itself. Management of expectations. I firmly believe last year was the product of their own belief of what they thought they were. The expectations were so high. Just what people thought this team would accomplish last year, they practically placed them in the World Series before they played one game. And I think after that first game, when Gio comes out and he plays the way that he played and everything went perfect, and then you got another pitcher, he comes out and everything goes the way it's supposed to go, and it almost went perfect. And then you have another pitcher, he comes out, it was Gio, Jordan, and then it was Strasburg, and then it was Gio, and then it was Zim. I mean, the way those first three games went, that team thought that they were on the fast track to the place that everybody had said they were going to be. And when they hit adverse situations and they hit hard spots, they did not have the answer for it. And as a matter of fact, it seemed as though they were a clubhouse that was in disarray based off of disappointment. Based off of disappointment, which is vastly different from being in a clubhouse that is fighting to win because they just don't win. This was a clubhouse that was disappointed because they are supposed to be winning and they're not.
You mentioned the expectations last year. Dan, I want to ask you, sort of, the expectations seem just as high. It's just maybe there's more of a muted sort of professional optimism maybe within the team. You don't have Davey Johnson saying, hey, it's World Series
they
or
came
bust.
up short.
It's a first-year manager.
I don't know that I agree with you that they seem just as high.
Oh, yeah, they're just, everybody thinks they're still going to be in
it's not as loud
in the playoffs.
as it was
I don't
last
think it
year.
is. I don't think when people start making.
Look at the Vegas odds. The Nats are like the third pick to win, the third best odds to win the World Series.
Well,
but when you're talking about being on the covers of magazines, being on every, they were covered super closely by everyone, and I think it's much different this year because
I think it's totally different.
They allowed for people to realize that you can put these expectations on us, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to live up to them. So I think it's different this year.
I think it was something like 40% of the experts that I surveyed last year had the Nats in the World Series. I don't think that they would be the consensus pick from the National League this year. Certainly, there's a strong group of teams. There's the Dodgers, there's the Reds, there's the Braves. I just don't sense this
Cardinals
kind of inevitability about predicting the Nats to the World Series that we had last year at this time.
Obviously, the big X factor is Matt Williams, the new manager, and how the team responds to him in his first year at the helm. Lots to see. Like I said, we're going to catch up with Adam Kilgore. He's back in town in the next couple of weeks, so we hope to have him on the show soon to get more in-depth with our Nationals preview stuff. For Dan Steinberg, LaVar Arrington, I'm your host, Jonathan Forsythe. Thanks for joining us on Post Sports Live today. We'll see you next Tuesday right here on Post Sports Live.
Really professional job, I thought, by us today. We got here on time. We started on time.